Originally, I was going to write a review for Octopath Traveler, having been released on the PlayStation 4 and 5 as of this month in June 2024. But it's been released numerous times before. 2018 when it first came out for the Switch, 2019 when it came out for PC, and 2021 when it came out for the Xbox. So everyone kind of knows what Octopath Traveler is all about and how its beautiful 2D HD graphics represent it, and how the stories of the 8 different protagonists are separate from one another, and the combat mechanics are really strong. So I decided I didn't want to write a review for Octopath Traveler for the PS4 and 5, even though Square Enix very graciously gifted me a copy of the game for these purposes. Instead, I kind of wanted to write a love letter to Octopath Traveler instead, because it's kind of saved me from gaming burnout in ways that I really didn't expect. Now, I have played Octopath Traveler before. I did play it on its original 2018 release for the Switch, but I never really took in Octopath Traveler at the time as a product that I could take at my pace. And I think as a content creator for JRPGs in general, I've been feeling very overwhelmed by the size and the scope and the heaviness of JRPGs of late, and perhaps if you've been following me for a while, you'll notice that my uploads haven't been as consistent for the last few months, and allow me to tell you why before we dive into Octopath and how it's changed me. To put things into context, I was originally a content creator for Final Fantasy Dissidia Opera Omnia, which is a mobile title that is built around the Final Fantasy franchise. And that was something I found quite easy to make content on, being a mobile gacha title and being somebody that doesn't actually like gacha titles but loves Final Fantasy. I used that conduit to help people find their way through this game that was regularly updated in short bursts. But when I decided to come away from that and I wanted to be a JRPG enthusiast instead and go back to the roots of what I loved in the first place with Final Fantasy, JRPGs are particularly challenging for content creators because they're huge, being realistic. They are massive, and you see a lot of content creators focus on singular RPGs, and there are a lot of content creators out there that focus on JRPGs as a whole, but by and large, they're such large games that you don't have time to finish one before the next one comes out. And this year in particular, after spending 200 hours with Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, which was very successful for me on this channel, and then moving straight into Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, having not long finished Final Fantasy XVI, and there being so much story content and so much that you have to pay attention to for hundreds of hours at a time, I kind of hit a limit. And I'm very well aware that there are loads of people that cover a lot of these games, but from a personal standpoint, and again, this is my experience, I'd hit my limit. And I ended up not playing video games very much at all for 2 to 3 months. I'd hit that burnout period. And honestly, there were not a lot of games that were able to pull me out of that. And the hobby that I'd loved and thrived on and even lived on these past few years, I just didn't feel the same way as I used to. But this is not a story about me and my life story, as it were. I'm sure people probably would have already skipped ahead and quit the video when I've been talking about myself. This is about Octopath Traveler and how it pulled me out of that situation. And I can tell you easily what the reason for that is, and it's allowed me to open my own eyes to what I value in a JRPG and what I think a lot of people value in a JRPG, and I know this for a fact having spoken to other people. Octopath Traveler is an example of a JRPG that is far more heavily focused on its gameplay aspects than its narrative. When you hear of a traditional JRPG, certainly, the first thing you hear about when you talk to people about it is the story. And if you eschew that story for any reason, if you skip the occasional cutscene because you kind of want to get back into the game, or you haven't paid attention to the minutiae of the things happening in that JRPG, so maybe you don't understand a reference that's come later because you didn't play that side game that happened 2 games ago, you're ostracized and kind of branded a heretic, because why are you playing JRPGs if you're not playing them for the story, right? Well, this particular release of Octopath Traveler 1, so I've played Octopath Traveler 1, I've also played Octopath Traveler 2, and I absolutely loved it, and I did a lot of coverage for Octopath Traveler 2 when it first came out. So much so that I got a letter from the developers to say thank you for the content that I'd made, and it was really like elating. And I got this code through, again, massive thank you to Square Enix for this. And I did a couple of streams with it, and I kind of enjoyed it, but I felt the need to skip the cutscenes, and because A, I had seen them before, and B, it wasn't the aspect of Octopath Traveler I loved in the first place. Like, the stories are very separate. They are good stories as well. They're very grounded in a way that I think a lot of JRPGs kind of lose themselves in their own anime-ness, if you will, where everything has to be about these world-ending stories or multiverse-ending stories. We won't get into that one. But Octopath Traveler doesn't really have that, at least not until the absolute end of the game, where it's a singular entity near the end of, like, at the end of the game. Everything else is very grounded. It's about the singular characters. It's not this giant sprawling, you know, multiverse of story. What you do have instead of that, though, are extremely finely tuned battle mechanics, the ability to customize your party however you want and you not feel punished for it, because the job system in that game is superb and is one of my favorite job systems in any game ever. But equally, you stick a job system in any game and I'll probably want to play it. And also, the visuals are arresting. Like, that's the only word I can think to use to describe it. Octopath Traveler's visuals are what you remember games looking like when you were a kid. Have you ever loaded up a game that you haven't played for 10, 15, 20 years, and you load it up and you think, oh, this doesn't look as good as I remember it? Octopath Traveler doesn't have that problem. Octopath just looks stunning. The glittering snow, the detail of the particle effects of the attacks, it's exactly how I remember video games looking when I was a child. And to have that kind of splendor and wonder to go back into a game, especially one I've already played, was really eye-opening. And if you look at reviews of Octopath over the years, whether it be the Switch version or the Steam version or the current PlayStation version, you'll see that all of the things that I celebrate Octopath for, loads of people celebrate it for, but there'll always be that caveat of, but the story's not as streamlined as we'd like it to be, but the characters don't interact with each other as much as I'd like them to. But for somebody like me who is coming out of this heavy atmosphere of JRPGs, like, I know Grand Blue Fantasy Relink isn't a particularly heavy story game, but Rebirth certainly was, and FF16 certainly was, and I've had recommendations for me for things like the Trail series, which are so intimidating to me because the idea of sinking 500-600 hours into a story I may not like is more time than I'm willing to give. But Octopath just let me have my fun, and that's exactly what I needed from any game to pull me back into wanting to play games altogether. I actually got the Platinum Trophy for Octopath Traveler, which I have already done platinum hunting for many, many years, and there could be an argument made that contributes to my gaming burnout. But with Octopath, I didn't feel that. If anything, it pulled me in further because it gave me more reasons to want to dive into every corner of the world, but the narrative not necessarily be the reason for me to do so. I'm not the kind of person that gets immersed into a world through lengthy cutscenes and being told everything. I'm the kind of player that likes a game like Journey or Metroid Prime, where I'm shown everything. A picture sells 1,000 words to me, which is weird as a JRPG enthusiast because that's not how many of them really portray that, but Octopath kinda does. I didn't need to be pulled into each separate character's story. Some of them I did, even though I have experienced them before, like Primrose's story I still think is really good. Ophelia's story I still think is really good. However, like Olberic's story I kind of think is a bit boring, and I'll be honest, I did skip all the cutscenes for Olberic's story because I didn't feel the need to really invest in that. But I was still very pulled into this world just by how Octopath presents itself. So if anything, this is a love letter to the HD 2D style, just as much as it is to Octopath Traveler itself. I loved Live Alive's remake. Star Ocean Second Story R had a similar kind of remake. I wouldn't quite say it was the same as an HD 2D remake, but it still gave me that same vibe. And with the announcement of Dragon Quest 1, 2, and 3 as HD 2D remakes, I cannot tell you quite how excited I am for them now, when for somebody who had come away from gaming pretty heavily altogether for a little while, I'm really happy to see that that's still in me. That then kind of opened doors for me in really nice ways. I've been playing Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance a lot these past few days, because again, it's a JRPG that, yes, of course it has a story, and I don't want to skip the cutscenes in this one because I actually want to invest in what's going on. But it's still a very gameplay focused JRPG. I would love to play more SMT5, but I've always bounced off things like Persona. I've always really loved Fire Emblem Engage, but could never connect with Fire Emblem Three Houses, because I think that people have this, misconception that in order to be a JRPG enthusiast, you have to be invested in the plot and the plot only, and the relationship between you and these characters, when I don't think that that's true for everybody, and it certainly isn't true for me. And based on conversations I've had with other people, it backs up the fact that I'm not the only one. And of course, how can I not mention the music of Octopath Traveler? It's just sublime, and I think it again lends itself to the idea that you can be enraptured by a world through means other than just the cutscenes that are playing out in front of you. The visuals, again, I will gush about HD 2D ad nauseum, but the music as well does such a wonderful job of capturing the essence of what the game is trying to show that it's hard not to get lost in it. I had a friend ask me about Octopath Traveler because he saw me playing it and said, would you say this was a good JRPG to get into for somebody who's not into JRPGs? And without even thinking about it, I said yes, and gave multiple reasons as to why. It's like, the combat is engaging, the story is not too heavy, therefore you can get in and you can get back out again at any time. Because it was originally a Switch title, you're able to sort of play the game at your own pace, save the game and walk back out again. Obviously, being on the PlayStation, it's a little harder to do that than it would have been on a Steam Deck or a portable console in general, because then you can just put on standby mode and then come back to, whereas on the PlayStation version, it's much better that you just find a save point. But my point still stands, is the short, digestible way in which Octopath is presented means, yeah, absolutely, it's something that I can recommend to newcomers to the genre. And there are other games that I then started thinking about, and other games I started wanting to recommend to people again, like Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest 11, I think, is a brilliant JRPG for people who aren't into it. Sea of Stars is another one that I just thought of, and I was plucking all of these names out of my head and realised, oh wait, I do still really love this genre. I guess if I'm wanting to put a message across when it comes to the information I'm presenting to you guys today, is it's okay to not feel like you have to absorb every ounce of information from every game you ever play, because that, or trying to do that when it doesn't come naturally to me. When I was 10 years old playing Final Fantasy VIII, I wasn't putting together plots and making school is dead theories or anything like that. I was playing a cool game, watching cool things happen, and summons come and do their thing. And that childlike wonder was very much still there, despite me not knowing every single detail as to what goes on in the game. And as I've gotten older, I've definitely come to appreciate the narrative and the story a lot more. But you don't have to be a lore diver to enjoy the JRPG genre. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. The gameplay and the strategy and the challenge, like, oh my god, the final boss of Octopath Traveler is one of my favourite fights in years, because it's genuinely hard. Like, you get broken in Octopath Traveler as you play through it, like, quite easily, and there's little combinations of things that you can do, Tressa as a Rune Lord, that you can really, like, play around with and do crazy things with. But even with all that stuff, the final boss is really, really hard, and I love it for that. And those strategies are what I like talking about with people, not what my favourite character had for breakfast yesterday. So for those of you who are into JRPGs and are into them for the gameplay, for the strategy, for the challenge, I guess I just wanted to tell you that you're not alone, because I'm right there with you. Of course, that's not to say that I would encourage people to eschew stories altogether. Sometimes, and I've definitely done this in the past, I've skipped cutscenes at the beginning of a game, and then maybe like 20% of the way into the game, I haven't skipped everything. Like, I want the general gist of what's going on, but I find it quite hard to get into a story. Maybe it's because of just how I grew up, I don't know, but I find it quite hard to get into a fantasy world. But once it's got me, it's got me. Like, Final Fantasy XIV is a really good example of that. Final Fantasy XIV is one of my favourite games ever, but it took me 5 or 6 attempts to try to get into it, just because the onslaught of lore and information was just too much for me to handle, and I just wanted to play a game. If you aren't feeling the stories, but you still want to play the game, that's okay too. So I guess, like, a closing statement, if you will, is that I'm just really grateful to Octopath Traveler, actually, and this being its, I think, 5th release, and it opening my eyes to what I actually really love about the JRPG genre, and thinking back to some of my favourite games within it. Bravely Default, funnily enough, is one of those games. I adore Bravely Default, and yet when I talk to people about Bravely, people are like, oh yeah, but the twists in the story are rubbish. I'm like, I mean, I didn't think they were, I loved them, but that wasn't why I was playing it to begin with. The music, the visuals, the combat, all of it just added up to what I deemed to be a perfect game for me. So any Bravely fans out there, do comment below and let me know how much you love Bravely and how much we need another Bravely game. But Octopath just really opened my mind, and to Square Enix for gifting me that code, and for me to actually sit and play it for 35 hours on the trot, so that I could get that platinum trophy and then walk away from it feeling really satisfied with what I'd done. Thank you. So yeah, that's pretty much everything I wanted to say about Octopath Traveler today, and do subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed what you've watched today. I'll be honest, I haven't been very consistent as a content creator, and I want to release like a proper apology for that, because I just kind of got a bit lost after playing so many really heavy games and not really knowing what I wanted from playing my games. But I want to get back on the wagon, and I really feel really good about my journey with it, actually. I'm going to TwitchCon next week in Rotterdam, and I'm looking forward to seeing people there. I'll be bringing my art prints with me, so if anybody sees me in Rotterdam and wants one, please do poke at me for it. Or if you're not going, then I do have an art store now as well, which I'll link down below. And come and find me on Twitch if you want to talk to me about Octopath Bravely. I'll always talk about Bravely. Final Fantasy, RPGs in general, or any games really. I'm actually going to change what's sitting on there because I've been looking for a reason to do so for ages. I'm actually just going to write a nice list of franchises that I want people to talk to me about, because I love so many different ones. But yeah, that's all from me. Thank you to those of you who have supported me over on Patreon as well. Of course, I'd be very remiss not to mention you guys as well. You've stuck with me through thick and thin, and I'm really appreciative of that. And thank you again to Square Enix for gifting Octopath Traveler to me, and also for just being supportive of the channel for as long as you have. Without you, I wouldn't be able to play half the games I've been able to do. So really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much for that. And with that, I'll love you and leave you. So have a good day, everyone. And if you want a quick TLDR review of Octopath Traveler, play it. Simple as. See you later.